Something I've noticed over the past, call it year or so, and especially in the past few months, is a lot of attention on social media as it relates to something called methylene blue. Now, this was something I knew about from medical school. It's something we learn about. It's a medication that we use for a very specific medical condition. And I didn't realize it was actually, something that people were touting as this sudden, kind of fountain of youth or something that could help with overall health and longevity and anti-aging. Even I think it was about a month ago, I saw, there was a flight and RFK Jr. was pouring some into his water. And so it really got me thinking, okay, what is the science behind methylene blue? Again, it's this FDA approved drug for, specific indications. And I knew about it from that standpoint, but not really understanding, what are the other potential health benefits of it. Today, we're going to be diving into methylene blue, understanding its origins from, an 1800s anti-malaria medication to now being this people call it kind of like an electron booster pack, and how it went from its initial FDA approved use for this specific blood disorder to now being, researched in things like Alzheimer's as well as a potential nootropic. So methylene blue has been around for longer than most pharmaceuticals you're probably familiar with. It was first synthesized in the 1870s and was actually used as a textile dye. And subsequent to that, Paul Ehrlich, who was a kind of a pioneer in chemotherapy research, discovered that it could actually be used to treat malaria. And from there, methylene blue has been found to have a ton of other medical uses. Everything from dyeing tissues during surgeries to identifying sentinel lymph nodes, and even in the treatment of some infections. In fact, in the early 1900s, doctors realized that it even had some mild antidepressant effects, although that was never really an official indication. And it was also used to track when patients were taking their meds because they could dye the medication and then you could test the patient's urine and you see the, characteristic blue color. And methylene blue finally found its first FDA approved use for the treatment of a condition called methemoglobinemia. And so basically what this is it's when your hemoglobin, and that's the part of your blood that actually carries the oxygen, it gets oxidized and it can't carry the oxygen properly. When this happens, people literally will turn blue from, being hypoxic or not having an adequate amount of oxygen. And so what doctors found is that they can actually infuse methylene blue, and it's kind of like turning the lights back on. Within minutes, patients, their color will improve. It can go from dusky gray to kind of, normal coloration. So it's, pretty remarkable, pretty dramatic impact. And in fact, it's such an important medication. It's actually been recognized by the World Health Organization, and it's seen as, essential for certain emergencies. Okay, so how does methylene blue actually work in your body? Before you, start taking methylene blue and assuming it's a fountain of youth, I think it'd be important to understand really what it's doing within your cells. So methylene blue can switch from a blue or oxidized form to a reduced or colorless form. And in your mitochondria, and basically mitochondria, if you go back to your, biology, these are the little power plants within your cells. It basically serves as an alternative electron carrier. So kind of think of it like an emergency generator that keeps the assembly line moving if part of the main system breaks down. So basically think of like a factory with a conveyor belt. And so normally, the belt's running smoothly and it's passing electrons along, which ultimately go to help to produce energy through ATP. But let's say there's like a glitch in the beginning of the assembly line. Basically, these electrons can start to pile up. And when this happens, it can cause them to leak out, and it can also form these free radicals. Well, with methylene blue, it kind of swoops in like a forklift operator who says, hey, I'll carry those electrons, past the damaged part. And so you keep producing energy, and at the same time, you're reducing the chance of the electrons going rogue and causing the oxidative damage. And this is huge for cells under stress, especially in diseases like Alzheimer's, where the mitochondria may be dysfunctional. So studies in rats and some small human trials can suggest that, or have suggested that MB can help preserve overall brain cell function. It can reduce free radicals, and it could possibly improve memory conditions in things like vascular dementia or even traumatic brain injuries. And this is huge for cells when they're under stress, especially in diseases like Alzheimer's, where the mitochondria may be a bit dysfunctional. And in studies in rats, and there are some small human trials, do suggest that MB could help to preserve brain cell function and reduce free radicals, and even possibly reduce or improve memory in conditions like vascular dementia or in traumatic brain injury. But this, and again, this is really important, the human evidence in healthy people is still really sparse. We do have some promising data in animals and a few small human studies for conditions like PTSD or early Alzheimer's. But as far as, touting it as a universal nootropic factor, right now that's a lot more hype than it is fact. So let's talk brain benefits, because this is really where methylene blue seems to be getting the most attention in longevity and biohacking forums. Researchers have found that at low doses, MB can cross the blood-brain barrier. And in animal studies, what they've shown is improved performance on memory tasks, better use of oxygen in the brain, and even protection against certain types of neurodegeneration. In fact, there was a rodent study they did at the University of Texas, and they had rats that had, chronically reduced blood flow to the brain, which is a really good model for vascular dementia. And they were given methylene blue daily. And what they found is that the rats performed significantly better on maze tests and when their neurons were healthier. And so these results really point to the ability of MB to help the mitochondrial wheels keep turning even when the blood flow is compromised. In humans, there have been some smaller pilot studies for things like PTSD and bipolar, where even doses around 200 milligrams a day were led to mild but absolutely noticeable benefits in things like mood and cognitive symptoms. And some folks also talked about the ability of MB to help inhibit tau proteins, which is a hallmark of Alzheimer's pathology. And so early phase trials did look promising, but a big phase 3 trial in Alzheimer's patients didn't really show a whole lot of benefit, except maybe in patients not on other meds. So again, it's pretty clearly, still pretty complicated. If you're generally a healthy person and you're hoping MB is going to turn you into some kind of memory champion, I wouldn't hold your breath. But if you have certain neurologic conditions, MB may hold potential as part of overall future therapies. And the research is ongoing, so it's definitely on the scientific radar. But I think it's important that we don't jump to conclusions based upon something that's just interesting data to suddenly calling it a miracle cure. So can MB actually help you live longer? And this is really where the internet hype machine seems to have, gone into overdrive. There are some cell studies that show that methylene blue can delay cellular senescence. So basically means it helps keep the cells alive longer. It can reduce oxidative stress, and it may even boost collagen. In a lab dish, MB outperformed classic antioxidants like vitamin C when it came to protecting human cells from damage. And so that's a big reason why it's being investigated in some high-tech skincare products. That in terms of animal studies, the National Institute on Aging tested methylene blue in mice, and they saw about a 6% increase in, the maximum lifespan, but this was only in female mice, and the median lifespan didn't budge. So it's really, again, it's not this fountain of new youth scenario. Think of it as a mild sex-specific tweak, but not an across-the-board life extension. No human trials have tested MB for anti-aging or longevity endpoints. None. Zip. There's none. And so if you hear someone saying, well, take MB daily and it's going to add 20 years to your life, that's jumping way, way ahead of the data. Still, the mechanism of supporting mitochondria, reducing free radicals, it makes sense in an anti-aging context. We just don't have the proof that it translates into humans, walking around living significantly longer or even aging more slowly. So because MB is such a Swiss Army knife in medicine, I think it would be, at least beneficial to talk about some of the other potential applications. So the first is, as I mentioned, methemoglobinemia, and this is an FDA-approved use. And really, this is its main indication. And it can rapidly reverse that dangerous form of hemoglobin that's unable to carry oxygen. Additionally, in surgeries and diagnostics, so surgeons will use it to stain tissues. And for example, in breast cancer, they use sentinel node biopsies. It helps to locate which lymph nodes drain from the tumor site. As far as an antimicrobial, historically, it was actually used for urinary tract infections or UTIs because it has significant antibacterial and antifungal properties. And it's also part of some photodynamic therapies where basically light plus MB can kill bacteria and viruses. There was even some hype about MB's potential against the virus from the recent pandemic, but at this point in time, there's really not a ton of solid data to support its use for that indication. Another use would be something, if the patient has like shock or needs blood pressure support. In septic shock or vasoplegic syndrome, MB can help to constrict blood vessels by inhibiting nitric oxide, which sometimes improves blood pressure when other medications fail. And in pain management, interestingly, some trials show that even using small amounts of MB near nerves, it may help alleviate chronic or postoperative pain. But this is still somewhat experimental. But again, I think it just goes to show how versatile MB can be. Now, some people may be thinking, hey, if this drug is safe enough to be used as an internal dye, how dangerous could it really be? But it's important to keep in mind here that, methylene blue is not some harmless supplement. At standard doses, let's say 1 to 2 milligrams per kilogram IV, it's generally well tolerated. But there's side effects with serious risks that can occur, especially when taken off label or when it's mixed with other medications. So first thing, expect your urine to turn either bright blue or green. And additionally, you may find that your tongue could turn blue if you're taking it orally. Some people also report headaches, nausea, as well as dizziness. And again, this is usually not a big deal, but at least it's something you need to keep in mind. Now, as I mentioned, we really want to exercise caution, particularly if you're on other medications. So one of the things it can cause is something called serotonin syndrome. MB can basically inhibit something called monoamine oxidase or MAO. And so if you're on an SSRI or other antidepressants, if you combine that with MB, it can lead to dangerously high serotonin levels. And this can be life-threatening emergency. So the FDA actually warns against any patients who are on SSRIs using MB unless absolutely necessary. Additionally, there's another condition called G6PD deficiency. And so in patients with this enzyme deficiency, which is typically more common in certain ethnic groups, MB can cause a severe hemolytic anemia, which is basically like all your blood cells burst. And so that is definitely not a desired outcome. Now, another thing to keep in mind is that at high doses, it's actually a pro-oxidant. And so ironically, if you overdose, MB can cause the very problem it's being taken to treat, methemoglobinemia. So too much of it, it flips from being an antioxidant to actually becoming an oxidant. And lastly, in pregnancy, it is category X, which means serious fetal risks. And so these can include things like intestinal damage if the fetus is exposed to MB because it crosses the placenta. And this is why self-medicating, especially with random internet dosing protocols, can be really dangerous. And one thing that's incredibly important is that medical grade MB is not the same as the methylene blue that's used to clean fish tanks. That's an unregulated product. And so we don't know what impurities it could potentially have in it. Now, I know we've touched on some of these, but I think it'd be helpful to talk about what are some of the biggest myths as it relates to methylene blue. So first one is that, it's a proven nootropic for otherwise healthy people. But the reality is that we just don't have solid studies that show that it's going to cause, a big improvement in memory or focus boosts for otherwise healthy individuals. Most of the data is in, specific patient populations where they already have a condition. Additionally, that it could cure, viruses, Alzheimer's, and, everything else under the sun. And the reality is, while it definitely has broad biological implications, it's not an approved cure for anything outside of methemoglobinemia, but the research is ongoing. Additionally, that people say, oh, it's completely safe to take as a supplement. But the reality is it's a potent pharmaceutical and it has real risks and implications. And then lastly, you may hear, and I've heard this, that some people say, oh, that the aquarium grade MB is the same as the medical grade. And this is absolutely not the case. That aquarium grade methylene blue, it can be contaminated. It can have a lot of, heavy metals. And so it's definitely not approved for human consumption. If you see someone claiming they've, discovered this miracle hack, just make sure you approach the claims with a healthy degree of skepticism. So wrapping things up, where do we stand with methylene blue? As I stated, it's an FDA approved medication for treating methemoglobinemia. And that is the one rock solid medical indication. It works and it can be life saving. Additionally, it has some intriguing, potential benefits in research, and especially for cognitive impairment, neurodegenerative diseases, and could potentially have some anti-aging effects in cells and in animal models. But we don't have, any like slam dunk large scale human studies yet. It can have some very serious risks if misused. So, especially if it's mixed with certain types of medications like antidepressants or in conditions like G6PD deficiency. And lastly, it's not a proven nootropic for just, everyday use. If you're healthy and you want a brain boost, you may be disappointed and accepting, unnecessary risks for something that really doesn't have the real benefit there. So, is methylene blue a total scam? It's not. It's very real. It's an old drug that has legitimate medical uses and it has some fascinating potential. But it isn't this all-purpose miracle that some corners of the internet claim it to be. But science is still catching up to the hype. So if you think you may benefit and you have a condition that's under investigation for the use of MB, you should definitely talk to a healthcare professional. You want to make sure, again, you're getting this legit pharmaceutical grade methylene blue. And, ultimately, it's important to keep in mind that the difference between a life-saving medication and a dangerous one is often about the context and the dose. All right, so that's our deep dive on methylene blue. It has a long history, complex science and big potential, but also some really big misunderstandings. And so I hope you walk away from this with a clearer perspective. Again, I'm Dr. Carr. I'm here to help you make smarter choices to live a healthier life. If you found this helpful, please, hit like and subscribe or share it with anyone else you think could find this helpful. And we'll see you in the next video. Thanks.